Okay.
So welcome to another episode of the INTUNE 5 Frequencies podcast. And today with me, I have the wonderful Emma Stirton, who has been a very important person on my journey. And yeah, I'm just beyond excited to welcome you today. I do want to give the listeners a little bio, a little update as to who you are exactly, and then we're going to be diving into everything that is the alpha frequency. So indeed, welcome. Emma, who is a coach who I've personally worked with as well, is a grounded human on a journey to reunite people back to their bodies and out of their minds. She is known for creating health hubs in whatever location she spends time in, where people come to meet themselves. Her journey to up-level humanity only comes after a realization that no change can occur until one looks first in the mirror. Her own humbling journey, which is ongoing, has revealed that she can never truly create transformation for another until she has done the work in herself. Her embodied teaching style comes from the idea that educating through knowledge is easy, but to give insight from a place of deep knowing requires walking through the fire first. Seated deep within the trailblazing millennial generation, Emma brings archetypical a manifestation of the mother supporting you to get more out of your life. And I can attest to that, having received your medicine myself. Welcome, Emma. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Yeah.
Where are you calling in from today?
Interestingly, and hesitantly, I'm actually telling you I'm from Colorado in America. I arrived here about a week ago, and we've got flurries of snow that I'm just watching out the window at the moment. So, yeah.
I think I can tell from your accent that you're not used to flurries of snow. So where is it you're originally from?
Aussie by birth, and grew up there. It's grew up on the beach and in the salt, sun and sand.
You must feel really at home with where you are right now.
Well, I mean, it's always novelty, isn't it? It's just changing the environment and
So, well, I have invited you onto this podcast, Emma, because I feel that you are one of the people really embodying the alpha frequency. And this, for those of you who don't know, is about the body, the physical vessel that we carry. And this is one of the biggest frequencies that we have. And this covers the nutrition, your fitness, your movement, your rest, your breathing, your everything that is to do with the human body that we carry. And we can go into that a little bit later, but I'd just love to hear from yourself a little bit about who you are and how did you get here today?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and my journey has been into the body. I mean, throughout life, I've always had a huge interest in the body and human physiology and the way that it works. And, right out of high school, I did a human movement or studied human movement and spent some time gallivanting around, but eventually got to the point where I studied a doctorate in chiropractic. And the process or the school that I went through was very focused on neurology. And so spending 5 years dropped into the way that the body communicates, the way that the brain talks down through the spinal cord to the body is where I guess really built a foundation on, and with that understanding have then stepped into embodiment of what that looks like, of looking at how our processes stem from this, and worked with people in that and worked with the neurology. And what's really interesting is that over time, what I started to notice is that when we were able to have a clear communication within people would start to heal. Most people would start to heal. And then I started to look at the people who weren't necessarily going through those same healing processes, and just was perplexed by the idea that we were going through the process, we were serving their bodies and reuniting their brain to their body so they could go through that healing journey, but weren't quite getting there. And you know, speaking to colleagues and speaking to people in the profession and also outside of the profession, there's this idea that some people don't want to heal. It serves some people to be in a state of pain, or to be in a state of dysfunction or dysregulation, or maybe some people don't want to function at their optimal potential. And this kind of led me on my next journey, which was looking at psychosomatics. So how the mind can actually run the body despite the body looking functional, or how the mind can play a part in the healing journey. And this is very well known when we look at the placebo effect and the nocebo effect, the ability of somebody's psyche to dictate how well they go through the process of stepping into their own. And at that time, I also kind of came to a point in my life where I was like, there's got to be more than this. Like, I went to this incredible school that was built on a philosophy that the power that made the body has the power to heal the body, and everything that is expressed through the body is exactly perfect and exactly what should be happening. And we have the ability to heal. And we don't need any outside interference. We don't need anybody doing surgery or any medications or anything like that for the body to heal. The body has the ability to do that. And so this philosophy that I came with is how I lived. And it served me until I got into practice and understood that, like, hang on a minute, this works for 80% of people, but what about that 20% of people? And what about, like, these patterns in me that, like, I'm getting adjusted regularly. I'm going through the process and living a life that from the outside looks fantastic, but there's still some things on the inside that, I don't know if we can swear on this podcast.
Yes, definitely.
that I'm like, there are still things in me that I feel fucked up with. Like, I haven't gone through the process of, like, getting to the bottom of it. And yeah, that's where I ended up starting to dive into the idea that we all have a worldview, and that worldview comes from our upbringing, and what we learn when we're in our first years of life, from 0 to 3 and 0 to 7, and what we experience in that time really dictates how we then live the rest of our life. And it allows us to really thrive or just survive. And in that learning and that understanding, and realizing that there are patterns that have been stored within our brain and within our mind, keeping in mind that the mind is not just in the brain, but in every cell in our body, that in order to heal these things, yes, looking at the neurology and adjusting people will really help, chiropractically adjusting people, but sometimes you actually have to step into that state and go back to the original time frame when these patterns first begun. And first, before I dove into that with other people, I started to look at that myself and started to go through this healing journey myself. And it was the most profound and potent thing each step I took. And the more that I realized, it's like, oh my gosh, the world is missing so much of the puzzle. It's like we have this understanding and in the physical world, this mechanistic world, that the body is it, and it's completely disconnected from the spirit and completely disconnected from the mind, but it's so directly and intimately related. And coming from a scientific point of view, it is undeniable. when you start to see the changes in people,
Yeah.
and feel it within yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about before this call that I trust deeply in synchronicities. And also thank you so much for sharing that, because this is deeply, deeply aligned with INTUNE and the whole aspect of we can be our own self-healers. Apologies for the dogs barking. That people can be their own healers and be empowered for that as well. And this book that I was reading this week, that is just like a premonition of us having this call, is The Body Keeps the Score. And I don't know if anyone's read this book. I highly recommend reading this book. But the author states, and he's had like 30 years of research experience, and the scientific field constantly keep refuting that, oh no, the stress and your input of when you're a child and the input of your needs not being met by your parents, like having an impact on you as an adult, all of these aspects still not being taken seriously by mainstream science. They would rather just give you a tablet for your depression, a tablet for any psycho issues that you have going on. And it's really amazing to think of how much further we still need to go with this as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I mean, you only need to trace things back to why we live in a society where the pill and a potion and a surgery is the answer. And I mean, without going too much into it, it's like you follow the money. It's like you follow where the pharmaceutical companies win and where we win. And inherently, there are so many philosophies, there are so many forms of medicine outside Western medicine that would have our world today functioning at a much higher frequency, keeping it in line with the frequencies, and in healing and living a thriving life, as opposed to a life that is filled with the maladies that are killing people today, like diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune, obesity, cancer. Like, these are our 5 biggest maladies, and they are driven by a disconnect. They're driven, I mean, on a physical level, yeah, you can look at the physiology and go, oh, well, this is happening and our diet's bad and this and that. And it's like, okay, so what is our connection to our body, and why is it that we have bad diets, and, you know, and why is it that we have anxiety and depression? I mean, 60% of people in America, 60% of women are on antidepressants, antipsychotics, or anti-anxiety, like 60%. And what we know is where America is, the rest of the world follows in terms of what's happening health-wise. And I mean, that's huge. That's more than half of our women. Our sisters are taking medication that further disconnects us, because we're not actually looking at the cause. We're treating a symptom, and when we treat a symptom versus looking at a cause, it's an entirely different conversation. And it's the cause that we're interested in, because if we can get to the bottom, if we can get to the why of what is happening in the body, what is happening in the mind's body, what is happening in the neurology, then we can start to see a shift in the perspective. And often people just don't know. We're not educated. We're told that this is the way that it is, and we take it for granted because this is what we've watched our parents do. This is what we've watched our grandparents do and our friends do. And it's like, in order to step out of the box, it's challenging, and it's difficult to be the black sheep and be like, you know what, like, I don't want to do it that way, or I'm depressed and I need support, and this is the support that I know how to get. And to do it a different way when you're already in a state of survival, I mean, it's challenging. It's not easy. And so it's, first of all, it is about education and understanding and building this idea that this is not, they call it allied health. Like, it's not beside, it's not the norm, you know, as opposed to Western medicine, which is the God that sits and dictates. It's like, okay, so if we can look at it as something that, and we can bring about this idea that it is the way forward, as opposed to looking from the outside in, as opposed to the inside out, I guess is what I'm trying to get to with that point. Yeah.
This deeply resonates. I remember previous in my life when I went through depression, and my family's like, just take the tablets, like your father takes them, like your family takes, like it doesn't matter, it's like what everybody does. And doctors are less likely to be open to, oh, maybe I should look into my ancestry, maybe I should look into doing emotional release. Like the terms like conscious and alternative medicine is scary for the majority of people, and especially people in, let's say, normal life, who maybe aren't exposed to some of the things that, I mean, most of us find through doing our own research, or just by pure luck and chance of being set on a certain path, which we call the healing journey, which I have a lot of people in also my school life, my old life, that wouldn't know how to define healing journey, because it's not something that is very commonly used outside of, let's say, the healing spheres. So something that really comes to mind is that you've said that you went through this whole journey yourself. So anything that you've taught, anything that you're guiding people with, you've done the deep diving also yourself. Is there any advice you have for people? Because I imagine even this 80% you've talked about who are getting, let's say, physical adjustments and feeling okay, or even the 20% of people who are still really struggling with issues and they're not sure how to take those first steps deeper. Is there anything that you can reflect from your own journey, or any tips you could give to people who are really like at the beginning of this process?
Yeah. I mean, breathe. And it sounds ridiculous, and it's so basic. And the thing with stepping into this healing journey is that it is really simple. And I think medicine has made things really complex, and so we think that we actually just don't understand to heal because it's too complicated. And so, yeah, I mean, my healing journey certainly has required me to step into my body, and stepping into your body, or what does it mean to be embodied, or what does it mean to have embodiment within you. I mean, I feel like there's the new agey spiritual terms that we throw these, like, oh, I'm embodied, and I'm on a journey to enlightenment, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's almost sometimes we bypass the importance of the basics, and we bypass the things that are hard. And so when I say breathe or come back to your breath, it's about coming back to your body. And what does it mean to come back to your body? It means to actually stop for a minute and feel what's going on within your system. We live in a high-paced world where everything is due yesterday. And if you're not running this, like sprinting this marathon, what are you doing with your life? And so we often, and this is what we see with burnout as well, it's we don't stop and reflect, and when you don't stop and reflect and you keep going, you eventually burn out. And so coming back to your breath looks like how many times a day do you actually focus on your breathing and stop and breathe? And maybe we can do it now. It's just like, okay, let's take a big, deep, slow breath in. And where do you notice the breath come into your body? Do you notice your belly expand? Like, do you notice your genitals relax? Do you notice any contraction in your anus? Like, where are your feet on the ground as you breathe? Like, when you breathe, can you feel your lungs expand? Can you feel the air coming into your throat? What's happening with your shoulders? And it's just like, okay, here I am. And this is simply the physical body. And so by coming into that breath, and where do you breathe from? Are you breathing from your mouth? Are you breathing from your nose? And for me, I just took a big breath in through my mouth. And when we breathe through our mouth, we are in this state, or we can bring ourselves into a state of heightened alertness. Mouth breathing puts us in a stimulated state, or a sympathetic state. So there's two states where the nervous system lives. It's either in the sympathetic state or the parasympathetic state. And the sympathetic state is that go, go, go state. You can liken it to if you were, I mean, this example has been given a million times over, but if you were ever in a forest and you were back hunting and gathering and you came into contact with a saber-toothed tiger, your body would go into this sympathetic state where all of the blood moves out of your core, and so it moves away from digestion and into your muscles. So you then have the ability to fight, flight, so run away, or go into a freeze state, which is something else we can maybe go into. Freeze isn't often spoken about, but it's a state where our mind actually can get our body mind, so our mind, our cellular mind can get stuck. And this is where people often get paralysis by analysis and don't move into a big healing state. I'm diving further forward here, but this fear of the world. And this often comes from being in a hyper aware state, and everything is just too much. And so when we're in this state, we often don't digest food well, because there is no blood and nutrients circulating around the digestive system. And so all of a sudden we have women and men with IBS, and IBS is a disorder of the mind. It's because our mind, our nerve system is not in this calm state, so we can't rest, digest, and repair. And when we don't digest, all of a sudden food that's coming in either gets held because there's no peristaltic movement to move the food through the digestive system and you're constipated, or food comes in and it's like, I actually don't have the ability to digest this, so I'm just going to shoot it out the back end. And then we have diarrhea, and it's that flux between constipation and diarrhea, and it's actually because we're in a state of stress. And so when I breathed in and we sat for a moment and I just breathed, I noticed myself breathe in through the mouth. And because I'm talking, because I'm stimulated and excited, I'm in this sympathetic state. Whereas if we're in this sympathetic state and we're not in that process of needing to be, what would it be like if we sat and breathe for 3 breaths in and out through the nose? And breathing through the nose changes the neurology. It works on our vagus nerve, and it moves us to the parasympathetic state. And so these are big words, para meaning to slow down or to stop or to not be hyper, essentially. And the only place that you can heal, the only place that you can repair physically, chemically, emotionally, spiritually, is in a parasympathetic state. It's only when you're calm. And so when we're sitting in this fear, overstimulation, even when we exercise really hard, so low to moderate intensity exercise will increase your immune system, high intensity exercise will decrease your immune system, and this is a good thing because it's a good stress. But over long periods of time, if you're constantly in this stimulated state, you're not going to heal, you're not going to regenerate, and that's not just physically. In order for the mind to calm, and this is why we sleep at night, we go into a state of healing, and the more that we sleep and the more that we're tired and the more that our body draws us to actually, I want to take an afternoon nap, the more that our body's asking for a space to heal. And so you'll notice people that are really, really ill will spend lots of time in bed because their body is in a state of healing. And so even that conversation around what do we call illness and what do we call healing? It's like, okay, so I'm really sick, I'm going to lie in bed. It's like, what if you say, I'm going through a massive healing process right now, and I am having a health expression, which is one of my favorite chiropractic techniques. I'm having a health expression, and instead of being sick, I'm actually healing.
Yeah.
And yeah, healing takes time, effort, energy, and it's so internal. And in order to do that, we need to be in parasympathetics, and sometimes we just need to be in bed.
Yeah, I mean, as from my own experience of when I had my burnout and being literally confined to bed for nearly 2 months, it's really this, your own worst enemy is your mind. Like you say, we are conditioned to be like, if you are not hustling and working every hour of the day, then you're not worthy or valid as a person of our society. And trying to justify to people like, yeah, I really need to sleep more. I'm like you say, it's a health expression. I love this because there's so much shame on rest nowadays, so much shame. And it's something that just really takes over, and people are just like refusing to listen. They're like angry at their body for needing to sleep. Like, oh, my body's so unreliable. My body is like letting me down. And it's this disconnect. It's so destructive, I also feel, between our bodies and our minds. It's like you say, they are so connected, and it's all part of the same being as well.
Yeah, it's huge. And we're constructed, and we're really pushed to fit in a box, in the box of society, where we poke our legs out the bottom, and the legs are meant to be on this treadmill of run. And what kind of life is that? And it's when you can stop and really feel into the body and ask your body. And we haven't even got into the emotional side of things yet, but when we do drop into the body, we have the ability to start to feel and connect to ourselves in a way that will give us more understanding. And just like going back to the more that we know about our body, the more that we then understand and can take possibly a different route of healing, as opposed to popping pills and having surgery. We can look at, okay, so maybe I could do this. Maybe yoga is actually going to help my anxiety, or, doing breath work will help shift this low back pain, because and then we look at the physiology of that. Is as the diaphragm draws down, it presses down on the organs, which compresses the bowel, and by compressing the bowel, it'll stimulate those movements in a more functional way. Also, we're taking ourselves into a parasympathetic state. And so maybe as this happens, bowel movements start to improve, and we do start to poop more. And the more that we poop, the less back pain we have, because the bowels aren't pressing on the nerves that are coming out of the low back. And there is so much that we now understand when we take into consideration the fact that our body is not just a sum of its parts. And I was going to come full circle with something there. Just the idea that as we heal, it is something that requires the whole system. It's not just simply one-ended. And by looking at the body as parts, it doesn't really take into consideration what's really happening within the system.
I remember a very profound thing you said to me in one of our coaching sessions. And it was like, you need a body worker, a mind worker, you need somebody to help with every element of you. So it's not just going to a therapist, it's not just going to a yoga class, it's like also going to like an acupuncturist, like really covering all the different areas of your body and your health as well. And yeah, that always like stuck with me from when we spoke before.
Yeah, and it's finding the right one that works for you as well, because everybody's body is different, although we're the same. We're different because we grew up differently, and we express health differently. And so somebody that might work for one person might not necessarily. Really, when it comes to healing, we need to be safe. And so finding somebody that will support, first and foremost, safety within your space, and so feeling comfortable and feeling safe will allow us to drop into that parasympathetic state. And also, like, there are incredible practitioners out there, and there are some really shitty practitioners, and And so, wherever you are, and, I say that, but maybe they're just, the thing about finding somebody to help you on your healing journey is that, and this is probably more of a practitioner conversation, but once you out heal your healer, there's nothing more that you can get from them. They might physically rub and dub and shake and bake, but it requires them to be at a higher level of healing. And so I should reframe my shitty practitioners. It's just that they haven't done the work, and their work has been maybe in a different field. And as you're healing, find somebody that will constantly reach down and pull you up to a point where you're at this new level, as opposed to just being at that level of, I feel good, I think everything's okay. It's like, okay, cool. So how can you be better? Like, what more can you get out of your life? How much more optimal can you feel? And how much more optimal can you function?
This reminds me of almost a bit of a trap that we kind of fall into sometimes with the healing journey. It's like, does it ever end as well? And in your definition, is that possible? Like you say, it's to always be aiming for more optimization, but how do you also rest in the fact of enjoying the present moment as well as pursuing the best, highest version of yourself as well?
Yeah. I mean, it's understanding that the highest version of yourself is the one who stops and breathes and stops to be with yourself. And that highest version of yourself can, like, the journey to that will sometimes look very physical, and it'll sometimes look very emotional, and it'll sometimes look very chemical. Like, we go through these stages of healing in our life. And there is dark and shadow sides of both, dark and light sides of both of the healing process. And this is a very dualistic way of looking at it, but sometimes in the darkness, we do the deep dive. It's challenging. It is the work. And so we spend time healing that process. And if we stay in the realm of the physical body, we spend time healing the process or healing the body of something that it is communicating to us that it needs help with. And then we spend time in the fruits of feeling fantastic. And so that in itself is the journey of sitting with the awesomeness that you just successfully moved to. And which brings up something that I often speak with people about and speak with myself about too, because it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking when you know that things don't necessarily happen or occur for you, it's like I'm exempt from this, and I mean I'm a person too, and I've gone through my fair share of stuff, and I need to regularly remind myself that sometimes when we feel pain, all the time when we feel pain, it's a message from the body, and the pain, whether it be pain in your heart because you've just had a breakup, or pain in your low back, or sore neck or shoulder, or something happening in your digestive system. It's your body doesn't have linguistics. We don't have the ability to be like, oh, hey, knee, what's going on today? Oh, well, you really did it when you went for the run. It's like, no, there's not that. There's little niggles, and there is, and this is where we get more into the embodiment side of things. It's heat or tingles or tension or tightness, or maybe like a stretch, or there's always communication that's happening with your body. And if we don't listen to it on a subtle level, and this can also come out in the emotional way, like as I said, when we have a breakup, we feel it in our heart, and our emotions will express themselves through our body as well. And if we don't listen to it at that early point, it'll start to speak louder, and it'll start to speak louder. And all of a sudden, because we've been holding on and not listening, your body starts to scream. And this is when we have pain, and this is where we have that chronicity. And pain is never, ever wrong. It's always a voice from the body, and it's always suggesting that there's something there that needs to be worked on. And so looking at it from that point of view and saying, what are you trying to tell me? What is it there that I'm not listening to? And on a physical level, it could be some, your body needs some tender, loving physical care. On emotional level, every physical ailment always has an emotional component to it. And so it's connecting those dots. And interestingly, the process of healing through that, it doesn't matter what it is, it tends to look the same. It's coming back to the body. It's coming back to the breath. It's reconnecting the neurology to the area. And with the idea in mind that healing always looks the same. And once that penny drops, of realizing that the body doesn't need any help, it just doesn't need any interference in the process of healing, then life gets easier, because it's not like I have knee pain, this is what I need to do. I have shoulder pain, or I have, a headache, or my heart hurts. It's like they're not different maladies, they're all the same. And it's disconnection.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I've trained with the emotional release, so it's just like psychosomatic body work, so not just the process of activating the body, but activating also the mind and stored emotions and stored traumas also that can be stored, because it could be there's a current day ailment going on, like you say, it could be something in your shoulders, it could be there's something in your heart or your hip, but we also carry this stuff from before the present day. It could be from your childhood, it could be from your parents, from your ancestry. And I know for a fact that this is a topic that you're currently working on with your thesis, in regards to the impact of trauma and how that shows up in our body as well today. So is there anything you want to explain a bit about this topic? And this is like a huge passion, and I think something not studied enough. So I'm really, really curious to see all the insights that you're getting from this so far.
It's super interesting, and I feel like we could do like a 3-part series on childhood
for that.
We totally could. And the exciting thing is there's more and more research coming out about this, and more people actually realizing the validity, but essentially looking at and understanding that from the early years of our life, and this really ties into your frequencies as well, is that children before the ages of 7 have a brainwave frequency that and the neurology within their minds doesn't allow them to use their conscious thought. So there is no ability for their human part of the brain, or the part of the brain that we use when we're sitting in consciousness, to activate. What's actually happening is they are in a state of download. So their brains and their bodies and their minds and their whole systems is just watching everything that's happening, and they're absorbing it. They're like a sponge. They're like going through this process of moving through life and watching how people react, watching how, when this happens, this is what mum does. When this happens, this is how dad responds. And so through this process of watching and understanding, they are learning how to react. They're learning how to see the world. And so if there is a process that is mum does really well, the child will likely do it really well. If there is a process that mum has, maybe she's had her own childhood trauma and she responds in this way, this is how often the child will pick certain things up. And so through this, children then don't understand life the way that we understand it. And so when we talk about, so this is natural development, and this happens with all children. When we bring in the concept of childhood trauma, what we're talking about is something that happens to the child. And I should define trauma. There are two types of trauma. Essentially, if we can umbrella them, one is capital T trauma, and we call it capital T trauma, where we're looking at these horrible things that happen in life, abusive situations, war-torn countries, these things. What I'm actually talking about when I'm using the word childhood trauma is little t trauma, and this is anything that a child experiences, or anything even that an adult experiences, that they don't expect. And so there is this expectation in life is that when this happens, then this happens. But if there is something that occurs that they don't expect, they then build a perception about it. And that perception then comes with a feeling. And trauma doesn't happen in the mind or the brain. Trauma happens in the nerve system, and the nerve system is in every part of the body. And so if there is this experience that a child has and they don't expect it, and their whole body goes into contraction, their whole body remembers that, and all of their cells remember it. And so next time they experience something like that, even if it is entirely benign, their whole body will go into contraction. And so what we understand is that no two people being in the exact same situation, watching the exact same thing, will have the same experience, because they've had a different upbringing and because they've been exposed to different things throughout childhood. And so there is no child that gets out of childhood that doesn't experience childhood trauma, even with the most conscious parents. It's not something that you can, as a parent, avoid. And so it might sound a little bit morbid, but the idea is that we can minimize it. But of course, understanding that we all have this beginning of life, we can bring consciousness to it. So we're moving into the next part of life, knowing that we have this worldview and not everybody else has that same worldview. And so this Stephen Kessler has done a lot of work in this field, the 5 character structures, which is definitely something to have a look at, because you can build an understanding of where you might sit based on his work. And it's really interesting because there's lots there that you can unpack once you figure out where you are. The thesis that I'm actually looking at is there a possibility that we can have a nerve system that is functioning at an optimal level, where when we have exposure to this trauma, it doesn't settle in the body as trauma, because the nerve system is communicating freely and has a really good ability to integrate it. So it doesn't see it as something negative, which builds a certain brain pattern, but it sees it as just another experience, and it doesn't write in that state of fear in the body, or it doesn't write in that state of anger in the body. So, and this is where chiropractic comes in, because chiropractic, each time an adjustment, a vitalistic chiropractic adjustment occurs, it changes the neurology in the brain. And what we're looking for is a better communication between the brain and body, and between the neurons within the brain. And so without getting too technical, it's really basic. We're looking at communication, and what we know is communication in any relationship, whether it be romantic relationship, whether it be relationship with your mom and your dad, or your brother and your sister, or your best friend. If you're communicating well and everybody is open in communication, things things really, really work. If something is withheld, or if you can't understand, or if there's a miscommunication, relationships start to break down. And this happens in the body. The same thing happens in the brain, and it happens in the body. And so the goal with getting adjusted, and the goal with what I'm looking at here, is if we can get children in an optimal state where their brain and body is communicating, can we start to see changes in their perception of what they then express in terms of childhood trauma? Can we up level the ability for their body to deal with stress so it doesn't then be perceived as stress, simply through adjusting them? And, you know, on a human level, a lot of people say, well, why do you adjust children? Children don't have back pain and neck pain. And the answer is, well, chiropractors, vitalistic chiropractors, actually don't deal with back pain, neck pain, headaches. What we're looking at is how can we optimize the communication between the brain and body. And children go through stress, and this disconnect in optimization of neurological communication comes from stress. It comes from physical stress. Maybe if mum's hips were rotated throughout pregnancy and babe was squished into the corner and didn't have the full womb to swing and dance and do backflips, and mum didn't even know that she had an imbalance in her hips, and so babe was squished, and so maybe the system wasn't able to grow appropriately through a certain element of the shoulder or the neck, or maybe birth trauma happened, or so many babies get dropped. It's normal, it's okay. And so how can we then allow the body to come back to a state of normalcy? What about when baby's lying and maybe he or she always turns to the left? It's like, what's going on? Is there, you know, what's going on the right side? It could be physical. It could be that maybe mum started with actually 2 babies and they didn't want to turn that way. And this is getting quite deep. But they didn't want to turn that way because there used to be a twin there, and now they don't want to see that there's not a twin there. And so that's the emotional aspect of the stress that can come, that then builds a worldview in their life so their system doesn't function in this optimal state. So, I mean, I'm very interested in the children's side of things, not that I'm not interested in adults, but once we're adults, we then have the ability or the job of unwinding this trauma. And there are so many means and mechanisms of doing that. And yet, what would it be like if we didn't have to work so hard? What would it be like if we had a really good beginning and these children didn't, and we didn't have then 60% of these little baby girls ending up on antidepressants when they're in their teens and 20s, because they then had a better ability to deal with this stress and trauma, because their system was communicating in a more optimal function, an optimal way.
Wow. You've like thrown so much at me, and it's like I resonate all with it so much. And in particular, I love the concept. I've heard of this before, but the big T and little t, because I've heard this often when people criticize the healing journey, like, yeah, well, nothing major happened to you, nothing big, you didn't get in a car accident, your parents aren't divorced, like none of the big life, childhood traumatic events happened. But the underestimation of how these small T's of maybe your mom not meeting your emotional needs, or little things happening that actually, and this is, I read this in the book this week almost, that actually has a bigger impact necessarily than sometimes the more traumatic events. But it's criticized that we're just, oh, maybe you're just dwelling on things that didn't happen or didn't know. And your body doesn't know that when you're so young. It's like the different levels of your needs not being met, and you not really even knowing you have those needs. You just need to survive as a child. So yeah, thank you so much for explaining that concept and bringing it.
It's really, really interesting. And I know I tried to summarize my thesis in a nutshell, and
did a great job. I want to read it when it's done.
Of course. And just to give a practical example of what childhood trauma can come from, it's like, okay, I'm the baby, I'm screaming because I'm hungry, or I need my diaper changed, or something basic. mum has 2 other children and they're hungry and she's feeding them and she's got poop on her and she's trying to do the laundry and there's 100 million things happening. And so in that time, as a baby, as I'm screaming, I'm saying I'm really hungry or I'm upset, I need to be nursed. And mum doesn't come, and mum eventually gets there, because of course she will, because she's super mum. But in that moment, I believe that I'm not enough, because if I was enough, my mum would have been there to pick me up and to nurse me and to nourish me. And so it is subconscious. It's not a conscious thought, because remember, children in this state aren't in the brainwave state that allows consciousness. It's all subconscious. Often it's the theta brainwave state. It's this imprinting and a belief system that is built that it could be, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, and so this then lives in the body. And as this lives in the body, you get to 22 and you're going for your first job interview, and there is this subconscious belief system that I'm not enough, I'm not worthy. And then you go into this interview and this I'm not worthy, although maybe not conscious, is playing in the background. And then this wreaks havoc in your interview, for example. And so these imprintings, we don't know about until we start to look at them. And we don't, and so how can we heal them if we don't that they're there? And this is it when it comes to healing. Like, we need to start to learn about ourselves, and we need to start in coming back to our bodies and listening to the conversation that is happening between your brain and your body and your mind and your conscious mind, and having somebody there that will help you decipher the conversation that's happening, so then you can learn more about your body. And so once you know that you're running this pattern that I'm not worthy or I'm not enough, then we can look at rewriting it. And then, I mean, without even doing anything with that, without looking at rewriting the pattern, if you know this on a subconscious level, you can consciously have an override of that. And so if you're looking at this in terms of, if we go back to the interview and all of a sudden this lady who's now 22 that had this idea that she's not worthy comes into the interview and knows that this is a pattern without her having worked on it. She goes, so I'm running this pattern, but I know that this job is for me. And she can come from a conscious present moment state. You can override that, because I mean, full stop, end of story. You can override that when you're in a conscious state of mind. It's when we live in our subconscious, which is running the show 90% of the time. Our subconscious mind, which is built between the ages of 0 and 7, we're running from this space 90% of the time. It's only 10% of the time that our conscious mind is actually in the driver's seat taking the steering wheel. And so coming back to presence, and this is where embodiment and coming back to the breath, when we breathe and we're in the body, we're in a present state, which is very different from going and being in a subconscious state, running old patterns.
Yeah, I know that it's almost like one half of the healing of it is just shining a light on the pattern. It's like, that is, it's not the full part of the healing journey, because there's also then the like consciously like acknowledging when it comes up and feeling into it. But even just knowing that that's something that's running you as a program, you're like, oh, that gives so much clarity and so much reassurance almost that, okay, I understand a little bit more about why this is going on. And it's something that really just resonated with the thesis that you're doing, because you said about adjusting children, and it's also possible for babies to be adjusted, because it feels like a lot of the early trauma happens right from birth up to 6 months to 2 years. It's really that point when, is that safe to be doing adjustments, and is some mini trauma, small t trauma inevitable as well?
Yeah, super great question. Absolutely. So I speak to this a lot to new mums as well. So when we're adjusting babies, the adjustments don't look at all like that look like when it comes to I've just got a little mouse creeping around underneath me figuring our stuff out. So when it comes to adjusting children, you can imagine if you were to put your finger on your closed eye and put some pressure, the adjustment would look very similar or feel very similar to that. So because children don't have skeletons that have ossified, they're very moldable, and they really don't require a huge amount of input by any means. And so there's no clicking or popping. There's nothing that that the baby requires that adults require, because essentially they're very different in structure. And so the safety of chiropractic adjustments for children is, it's incredibly safe. There is so much research out there on that, and also on the importance, because the trauma of the physical trauma that children go through simply by going through the birth process or simply by being in the womb is something that is a lot. I mean, the compression, and children are designed to go through this. And so the plates in their skull, as they come down through the birthing canal, they all overlap on each other. And so when they're in utero, babies' heads are bigger than what they are as they come down and go through the vaginal cavity. And this compression of the plates in the skull is actually an integral part of beginning life outside of the womb, because life outside of the womb requires a pump of fluid from the brain to the low back. And the only way that starts is if there is that intense compression that happens through the vaginal cavity. And so the brain then is able to have nutrients, oxygen moving around it as they go down through the cavity of the vagina in the birthing process. But then also, if there is any torsion that happens, or if there is any forceps or delivery intervention, this changes this whole process. Or if mum has had trauma, I mean, one of the other things that I'm starting to look at is, as women, we store anything that comes into us in our cells. And so if we're looking in the vagina when we have sex, there is cellular memory of everything that has happened. And often women will have within the vaginal cavity themselves, on the inside, on the outside of the labia, there is trauma patterns that are stored. And what that does is that can actually change the cellular structure. And so there can be contraction. And so there might be numb areas, there might be areas within the vaginal cavity itself that has a wall of contraction because of some trauma. Maybe it wasn't big T trauma, maybe it was little t trauma. And so as baby comes down past that aspect of the vagina, that changes how they then start to pump this fluid around their body, which changes their ability to nourish their brain. And so what chiropractors will do is come in and make sure the plates in the skull are all sitting as they should. And it's not like, if they're not, we then come in and do a big move. No, it's really gentle, because the body has this intelligence that always wants to move towards the optimal state of function. But sometimes it just needs that little bit of assistance, so the brain chiropractor will then move it. It's that we free up the connection that was previously disconnected, so then the body can start to go through this physical healing, emotional healing, chemical healing, spiritual healing. And so I mean, and this is a very biased point of view, but like my want and is actually that every child at the beginning of their life gets checked and adjusted by a chiropractor, or checked and then adjusted if necessary, because children that then go into life with this physical distortion are more prone to childhood trauma. And this is the other aspect of the thesis that I didn't get into. But if there is anomalies within a system because there is a state of stress, they won't function as well.
Would this be the case also for cesarean section children who do not go through the passage of going through the birthing canal?
Yeah. And so, I mean, C-sections are massively on the rise, and they're so much more convenient for doctors, and they're marketed that they're more convenient for mum as well.
Yeah.
I mean, for mum, it's a major abdominal surgery, and this is what we're not having these conversations. And for baby, we don't have that compression, and so all of a sudden they don't have the first pump of life. They also, for section babies, what I've started to read is beginning, but it's very, very minimal in hospitals, is that as baby comes through the vaginal canal, they also have a huge exposure to mucus that mum has, and this switches the immune system from being allergic to everything to being able to live in this world. And so if they're not then covered in from nose, mouth, ears in the mucus that mum has through the vaginal cavity, they then are children that are essentially going to be much more allergic to things. So what's actually happening is some hospitals are putting a cloth within the vaginal cavity, and so instead of the first thing that touches the child, which is skin and gloves, it's actually that. And so the best thing that mums can do if they do end up in a C-section position is to, it sounds a bit full on, but actually take a swab from the vagina, like get your fingers in there and rub it, nose, mouth, ears, all over the body. And then of course, when it comes to the compression of the skull, deep massage. And so when I say deep for babies, it's pressured massage is really important, because that'll stimulate their nerve system in a way that they would have got if they did go through that process. And you'll notice babies as well that have sections that have been born through C-sections, they have these big perfect shaped heads, and often babies that go through the vaginal cavity kind of a bit distorted. And so it like aesthetically looks better, but what are we missing because we haven't gone through that process?
Wow, I had no idea about all of this, and I feel like it's a topic for another time, but this whole aspect of de-armoring, I think, is like the process that people use with the regaining sensitization in the vagina and all of the aspects of whatever is being stored there as well. It's definitely a topic for another day, because I think that's something that we can go way deeper into, but I just never even knew that was a concept, that a child is being born and passing through past the cells where this is already, and this is maybe more spiritually also being held and remembered by the body. That's just coming through. Also, I would say also then previous pregnancies and previous connections, if there's been previous siblings or abortions even, that this is also all stored inside the body. Wow, thank you so much for going into all of this.
Of course, it's there is, I mean, body is incredible, and it there is so much there. There's so much to talk to.
I mean, this is not going to be the last time that we're talking about these kind of topics. Like, there's so much that we can go into. I'm wondering how, at the moment, like what kind of offerings and what kind of work are you doing? And if there's anybody who listens to this and they're also resonating so much, even like I have been with what you've been saying, how they can work with you, or how they can at least like connect with you on a further basis.
Sorry, my internet just bummed out for a second.
That's okay.
In terms of offerings, I mean, I'm this is a good question. I obviously am a chiropractor and love practicing, so I mean, always reach out, and I'm currently traveling, so if you ever want an adjustment, reach out. I have really started to enjoy working with people to start to tap into their body. And so I do online sessions. I mean, if anyone is wanting to look at what it feels like to start the embodiment process, or maybe you're already very much on your embodiment journey and want to come back to that process, it's there's the embodiment aspect of it, and there's also I use this word, transformative coaching. It's like, okay, so what is your body telling us that we can then use in order to step into this next? I mean, this is a little bit of what I'm doing at the moment. But yeah, I'm not, I wish that I was better in terms of offering and being more active on the socials. I tend to wish, I look at people and be like, oh, look at all this amazing content that you're putting out. And so maybe that's something that I can focus on. But yeah, that's a little bit of what I'm doing.
Having been the recipient of your transformative coaching, I can recommend that to anybody, because even just a couple of sessions with you were deeply, deeply profound with connecting me to my body and emotional processes. So yeah, I would love you to not play yourself down, because yeah, there's some magic that you've got going on, and also you're learning and studying so much. So it's also, yeah, there's a lot to come, and very grateful to have had you here.
Oh, so grateful to be here. It was really fun. Yeah, and as you said, I think that we've opened up a can of worms, so there's probably a couple of different topics that we can talk on more in depth. And it's a pleasure. And thank you. And thank you for the questions and the deep dive. And
yeah, perfect. Well, I'm going to thank you for having been giving us everything about the alpha frequency. And yeah, for the rest of you, I will see you all on the next one.